Hey guys, Omni here. So last night I went and saw Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve. This is the first adaptation of Dune that I have ever seen. I've not read the book prior to this screening as well, so this was just going in with a blind eye. Now there are a couple of things that I knew going into this, and that was simply it's heavily inspired Star Wars. It has a desert planet at the center of it all. Spice is the primary resource of it. And it's got sandworms, massive sandworms that would make Burt Gummer crap his pants. That's pretty much all I knew going into this, and that it was a science fiction political epic. I think that's one of the best ways to kind of describe it. This is, I think for anybody who's unfamiliar with what Dune is, I think a good modern comparison would be to think of it like Game of Thrones in space, with obviously some Star Wars flavor in there, because Star Wars got a lot from this series. And just going into this the way it is, you can just see the framework that inspired Lucas to kind of build that original trilogy. It's really interesting because obviously the book itself well predates anything done like that. So it definitely influences not just Star Wars, but a lot of science fiction that came after this book. This book was a heavy influence to the genre. And it is meaty. Honestly, while I was watching this, I'm honestly kind of surprised this isn't going to be 3 films, because I know the marketing for it is just Dune. But we know going into it, at least if you've been keeping up with the film, if you've been keeping up with film in general, we already know that this is part 1 of a 2-part adaptation of the first book. Now, when you actually get to the film, minor spoiler, kinda, not really, the title comes up and it says Dune Part 1. You don't see that anywhere in the marketing, and I'm sure there's got to be some people that are going to go into this and be like, Part 1? But knowing that, by definition, it's an incomplete story. So, I would say, the film is one big first act and then a partial point of a second act. I really think once the second portion comes out, this is definitely a need to watch in a back-to-back scenario with these films, because it picks a good spot to end, but it definitely leaves you wanting to see where this is going to go. And like I said, for somebody who doesn't have a lot of background in this series, it did a pretty solid job at setting up the world, setting up these houses, setting up their individual goals, desires, and this world. There are a couple of things here and there that I wish it would have spent a little more time explaining, but through context and conversations throughout the movie, you do kind of pick up just enough to kind of understand a little bit of how things work. And obviously, that's going to be the case when you're adapting something so thick and meaty, especially when adapting a book into a film. There's going to be things that you just kind of have to streamline to kind of get the ball moving. Otherwise, you're going to spend it forever in exposition land, which is something that I really liked in the film itself, is everything that it explains, the conversations, at least to me, felt natural. Anytime something came up or something had to be told to another character, it never felt forced or like it's only there for the audience. It felt like something in this moment the characters would say or do, or with the way the plot is going, there's research that happens, there's planning that happens, that the characters themselves are taking in this information, and it just helps the audience along as well. I found that very refreshing. Now, like I said, there's quite a lot. It just kind of name drops a couple things here and there and just kind of moves along. You don't really understand the complete inner workings of everything, but it gives you enough for the main plot and drive of the story to move forward. But all of that is backed by stellar performances, I think, across the board from everybody involved. I don't think any one person necessarily stood out in this movie as just oh my gosh, they're carrying this film, or they were blowing me away, because I thought everybody in this was bringing their A game. Everybody melded away into these characters. I thought everybody was just kind of, everybody's role felt very lived in, and it's like a who's who of actors in movies today. You're going to see a lot of familiar faces, especially if you're a DC or Marvel fan. There's a lot of people you're going to recognize across the board in here. And Timothée Chalamet does a solid job as our lead in here as Paul Atreides. And I'm really excited to see more of him moving forward, especially since he's going to be in the Willy Wonka reboot coming up here real soon. Quite the jump from Dune to Willy Wonka, but I'm curious to see how that's going to go. Also, another surprise appearance from David Dastmalchian. This guy, it is the year for David Dastmalchian, man. He's in Dune, Suicide Squad, all over TV. He's just everywhere. This guy, and he deserves it, dude. All that being said, I do feel like there's a minor weak link in the cast, and it's not necessarily the actor's fault, I don't think. I think it's just like the scope and ways that this character is introduced that doesn't lend much material to kind of chew on or work with, and that's Dave Bautista's character. We don't see a lot of him, but what we do see is very kind of one note. So I imagine as the plot thickens and we get more into part 2, he'll have a much larger role. But what we do see, it's just kind of like, okay, that's Dave Bautista being Drax, essentially. Aside from that minor nitpick, I think the cast and crew did a phenomenal job bringing this story to life. I will also kind of temper a little expectations because, again, the marketing is heavily pushing Zendaya. I'll be honest, a lot of her scenes you've seen in the trailer already. But again, like with Dave Bautista's character, I imagine come part 2, this character is going to have a much, much larger role. And it's why these are meant to be 2 parts. Obviously, like I said, this is a meaty series to adapt from its reputation, so I have to imagine that a lot of this just has to be divided up. But obviously, because Zendaya is so hot right now, they definitely want to lead into her marketing in there and definitely get you excited for part 2 when that comes out. The visuals in this movie are out of this world, quite literally. You know, from the sets, the locations, the technology, the architecture, the landscapes, everything is beautiful. I feel like there's probably not a scene, unless it involves Stellan Skarsgård, that I would love to just have as a wallpaper. Because the character he plays, I would not like to have staring at me while I'm working or anything of the sort. But this movie is beautiful. It's filmed so well. From the framing to the special effects, everything comes together. The technology in the world I find extremely creative. There's some sweeping and epic action sequence in here that I didn't quite expect for like the first piece of this. It's this kind of stuff I would expect to see, you know, towards the climax of this story. But there's some action sequences in this that are quite harrowing and gets the pulse racing. There's the way they fight and their technology with the shields and the knives and the way this world is kind of adapted around their technology into combat is really interesting. And a lot of the knife fighting is very practical. It's not overblown or flashy. I really, really like the combat in this. Like a lot of the fights I thought were really, really well done. They really turn every fight into this intimate chess game of trying to one-up the other person and get their opponent in their weak spots. Because of the way that the shields operate, there's a specific ways you have to kill people, and it's just really inventive, man. Like while like I said, I wish this movie would have explained a little bit for me going into this, not knowing the full extent of the world. I feel like I got just enough to get through the film and have a good time with it. It is a bit of a slow burn. It is a long movie, but for me, it didn't feel its length, and it took its time. It built up, though, again, it's not a solid ending because it is just setting up the next film because it is a part 1. It is going to feel like you got a little blue-balled at the end, but I had a really good time with this film, and I do recommend it, especially if you're a science fiction fan. If you're a fan of high fantasy, I think this is a great way to go as well. But yeah, I quite enjoyed it for a newbie to the Dune franchise, but I'd love to know what you guys thought. You veterans of the series, you other newbies to the series, what did everybody think of the film? Sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. You can also join the conversation in our Discord. Links to that and all my socials are down in the description below. Before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends, Mandy Sherritt, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori Korskov, Margaret Grace, Peeling Zim, Mary Bradley, and Jeffrey Hale. Thank you guys so much for your support. But that's been my review of Dune, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care, everybody.